We're going to continue in the book, A Genealogical History, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. Again, just in case you're new, we're going to be reading from chapter 9 today. We've been reading every single chapter. We've read the preface introduction of this book. So on previous videos, make sure to go back to the videos so you can get all the information. It goes through different states. Just a reminder, just in case for the new people and everybody who might have forgot, in the preface, just want to point out, in this work, we present a series of colonial documents, contemporary first-hand accounts, records, portraits, family genealogies, and ethnic DNA test results, which fundamentally challenge the national storyline depicting America's first settlers as white, British, and Christian. We postulate that many of the initial colonists were Sephardic Jewish and Muslim Moorish ancestry, usually arriving as crypto-Jews with their religions adherents disguised, and crypto-Muslims. These immigrants served in prominent economic, political, financial, and social positions in all of the original colonies. And it says here, it's called The Jewish Blackness, Thesis Revisited. This is from Ron HaKohen from the Department of Literature, Tel Aviv University. This is from 2018. It says here, the abstract, the notion that in previous centuries Jews were considered to be black or seen as blacks has gained broad acceptance in scholarly discourse on the Jewish body since the early 1990s. The present article considers the notion analytically and then examines some of the evidence provided to support it. Much of this evidence does not stand critical examination. Therefore, arguably, the notion of Jewish blackness should be reconsidered. The notion of the blackness of the Jews or Jewish blackness has become commonplace in scholarly discourse, going back to the path-breaking work of Sandler L. Gilman in the late 1980s. Scholars often assert that a strong European tradition dating back to the Middle Ages, maintained that the Jews were black, or at least swarthy, and finds sharp expression in modern anti-Semitic literature. That in medieval literature, a theory prevailed in which the Jews were part of the black race, or were at least dark-skinned. This is from, and it tells you the sources here, Shavit 2001, page 182, or that the general look of the Jew was considered to be like that of the black. The initial formulation is the general consensus of the ethnological literature of the late 19th century was that the Jews were black, or at least swarthy, all right? That was the general consensus. They're letting you know here, all right? Remember that. Jews, what Jews? As the essay continues, however, both the weaker term swarthy and the inverted commas or scare quotes are dropped, and the term used is the blackness of the Jew, and not in a metaphoric sense. The Jews were quite literally seen as black. I'm going to read from this book right here real quick, just to corroborate. It says, The Natural History of Man, comprising inquiries into the modifying influence of physical and moral agencies of the different tribes of the human family, by James Cowles Pritchard. All right, and this is volume 1, all the way 1855. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. Again, the Jews of Portugal are very dark. All right, we're going to be talking about the Spaniard and Sephardic Jews of Portugal. and how I'm gonna, been letting you know, a lot of these became Huguenots. A lot of these ended up in Holland, the Netherlands, becoming known as Dutch and having influence in the West Indian Company and trade around the world, the ships and everything, and pirates, merchants. Again, these same people we're talking about were very dark-skinned people, so-called Negroes. Just want to read this book as well now, just to corroborate as well. It says Shakespeare and the Jews. This is a 20th anniversary edition from James Shapiro. All right, scholarly source here. You can dig on it. All right, and we're about on page 171 of this book. And it says here, the accumulated experience of over 100 years of travel, trade, and conquest had convinced Europeans that some of the accepted stereotypes of Jewish racial otherness, including the belief that the Jews were black, needed to be qualified when William Brereton jotted down his impressions of the Jews in the synagogue in Amsterdam in 1635. Amsterdam, again, that's in the Netherlands, Holland, all right? The Dutch, this is a Dutch synagogue, Dutch people, right? Amsterdam, 1635. He's going to let you know that he noted that the Jewish men are most black. They're most black. The Jews. Who was the Jews? Again, who was the Jews that were in Amsterdam? Most of those Jews, all right, had fled from Spain and Portugal. Sephardic Jews who were what? Most black. Remember, the Portuguese were very dark. We already read that. All right, you see the corroboration. And insatiably given unto women, drawing here on contemporary prejudices linking blackness and licentiousness. All right, so then he was talking a little bad about them and says, and when the Scottish minister Robert Kirk toured London in January 1690, he also paid a visit to the synagogue there. Now, this is a whole other different country. Right now, he's in England, now a whole different person, letting you know what he saw when he went in the synagogue, the Jewish synagogue in London, all right, in 1690. He observed over 200 Jews worshiping, 200, all right, 200 people, 200 Jews. He noted in his journal that they were all very black men. Again, Jews worshiping in a synagogue in London. They were what? All very black men. All very black men. Sephardic Jews. Who was in London as a Jew? A lot of these, again, were Sephardic Moorish Jews from Portugal and Spain. He noted in his journal again that they were all very black men. This is in 1690 in London, and indistinct in their reasonings as gypsies. By the end of the 17th century, works like the English translation of Francois Maximilian's Mission, A New Voyage to Italy, make clear that it is a vulgar error that Jews are all black. This Masson observes is only true for the Portuguese Jews. Again, only the Portuguese Jews are black. So when we already got that, this is just another source corroborating that source. All right, just want to read from this book also to corroborate what I'm letting you know, what the general consensus, right? Remember, he was telling us the general consensus during these times. All right, this book is called A System of Geography, or a descriptive, historical, and philosophical view of the several quarters of the world and of the various empires, kingdoms, and republics which they contain, particularly detailing those alterations which have been introduced at the recent revolutions. All right, and it keeps going, and I just wanted you to know this is from 1805. All right, 1805, and we're on page 49 of this book. They are known never to intermarry with any but those of their own sect, and notwithstanding this, it is argued we find them in different parts of the world, of all colors. Jews, what? Jews of all colors. They're come in every color. The English Jew is white. The Portuguese Jew is swarthy, so-called black. The Portuguese Jew, swarthy, very dark Portuguese, again, another source. The American Jew, olive. And the Arabian Jew, copper-colored. All right, I'm going to read from this book real quick. It says Jews and Blacks in the Early Modern World by Jonathan Scorch. All right, Jews and Blacks. This is the cover. But down here it says, towards the latter end of the 18th century, one finds the same changeability of Jews expressed in updated nuances in geographic context. The Reverend Samuel Stanhope Smith wrote that the Jews are fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France. The Jews are what? They're brown skin. They're brown in France, French Huguenots, and in Turkey, swarthy in Portugal. So brown in France and Turkey, and swarthy or so-called black in Portugal and Spain. They're black in Portugal and Spain. The Jews are black in Portugal and Spain, swarthy, black. Olive in Syria and in Chaldea, tawny or copper colored in Arabia and Egypt. All right, so different shades, all right, of complexion, the Jews. All right, again, another source here. All right, so further down in this book, all right, I want to read this part. It says, while such views may be passed off as mere descriptive statements about the darkness of Sephardic Jews, the darkness of Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews are what? So-called black. They have dark skin. Remember that the Jews of Portugal and Spain, which are the Sephardic Jews, all right, are so-called black. We already got a lot of references, different books. We go on to chapter 9, all right? We're going to continue with the book. This is we left off in chapter 8. We were talking about South Carolina, Huguenots, South Carolina, right? And it says here, chapter 9, Georgia, the last colony. Georgia was the last and most elaborately planned of the British colonies, but in many respects, it was the most lawless and least controlled of them. It was the only colony to be planted on soil claimed by a foreign power, Spain. It encompassed at first the settlements of a third nation, France, which maintained scattered towns in the Mississippi, Red River, Missouri, and Ohio River valleys, and its territory conflicted with another British colony, South Carolina. Georgia was both remote and vast. It extended in theory to the South Seas of Pacific Ocean. In theory, right? All these circumstances combined to open the doors to a diversified stream of immigrants, ranging from London Jews and the debtors emptied from England's poorhouses to the Protestant refugees from Catholic Salzburg and Scottish Highlanders. Okay, listen to all these different people. A lot of these are people of color. We've already shown the genealogy and the primary sources describing them. In the Tidewater enclave named Darien, although most of those just named were sponsored and official, there were an equal number of surreptitious settlers. The extreme western part of Georgia was the scene for an attempt on the part of the French to settle Jews and Gypsies on the lower Mississippi in the years from 1717 to 1722. Okay, Gypsies. Don't just imagine what you think of a Gypsy today. And again, Jews. We're talking about mainly Sephardic Jews, Moorish Jews from Spain and Portugal, Iberian. And the Gypsies, a lot of those are the same people. Gypsy meant a traveler, really was breaking down to Egyptian. We got a future video of this I'm going to show you how they were really described during these times, 1700s, 1600s, 1500s. They were described as really dark complexion people. The venture was launched by the Compagnie des Indes and a Scottish entrepreneur named John Law, evidently a Jew himself. Whether for good or ill, it was Law who introduced paper money, deficit spending, government bonds, and many of the methods of state financing used today. This is the guy who introduced all that, they're saying. Historians are divided in opinion as to whether he was a knave or a madman. Born at Edinburgh in 1671, Law carried on his ancient five families business of goldsmithing and banking before becoming an international gambler and having the ill luck to shoot a rival dead in a London duel. He was arrested, but he somehow managed to escape to the continent, where after a checkered career, he ended up at the court of Louis XIV A reward for his apprehension described him as Captain John Law, a Scotchman, age 26, a very tall, black, lean man, well-shaped, above 6 feet high, with large poke holes in his face, big-nosed, and speaking broad and loud. All right, that's how he was described. All right, what did they describe there? Law overhauled the strained finances of the kingdom and established the Royal Bank of France. All right, that's the founder. This guy was being described as black, very tall, well-shaped, Scotchman. He also acquired the state monopoly on tobacco, the exclusive privilege of trading to Mississippi, Louisiana, China, and the French East Indies, and the minting of the coin of the realm, printing of money, and issuance of government paper. Very important guy here in colonial Georgia, all right, who's being described as so-called black. Under the scheme that came to be known as the Mississippi Bubble, the poor of Paris and Alsace, overwhelmingly composed of Jews and Gypsies, the poor, right? The poor of Paris. So they're coming from France, these people, they're going to ship over to Georgia. Listen, overwhelmingly composed of Jews and Gypsies. I got a future video, don't sleep. Don't think these are pale-skinned people only. Were to be gathered up and sent as colonists to New France. The land agent was Elias Astultius, a Jew. Parisians subscribed in frenzy to the various stock issues. Fortunes were made on speculation. The first fleet of ships set sail and deposited its human cargo several hundred miles up the Mississippi between Natchez and Memphis. Human cargo deposited. They got rid of these Jews, so-called Jews and so-called Gypsies from the poor of Paris and Alsace, France, where between the Natchez and the Memphis. There the Jews and Gypsies, without arms or provisions, were supposed to hold the territory for France and combat the threat of Indian uprisings. After they realized they had been abandoned, however, many of them threw themselves on the mercy of the Natchez, the Choctaw, and Chickasaw. Listen to this. All right, this is deep right here. Others became part of the old settlers in today's northern, formerly western, Cherokee Nation of the old Louisiana Territory, later known as the Lost Cherokees. All right, big one. And this is something you can probably verify when you go case by case individually. And these people, genealogy would go back to these so-called Jews and Gypsies. A lot of them, all right? Not all of them, but most of them. They're telling you right here, there's a whole different story. What is a so-called Cherokee? The crash at home came in 1721, when it was discovered that the junk bonds, as we would say today, were worthless. Law fell from grace and went into exile, giving up his titles and chateau to take up a gambler's career again in the casinos of Europe. There are indications that this secret colony was not so secret. James Adair, all right, James Adair. Who's James Adair? Remember the so-called Indian trader? He was a Sephardic Jew. He was living amongst the Indians for 40 years. He wrote a whole book, North American Indians, trying to prove that they were the lost tribes, the people he spent. He saw so much resemblances when he saw their ceremonies, how they were dressing, what they were practicing, how they lived, that reminded them to the people living in the Old Testament. And that's why he wrote his book. So now listen to this. It says there are indications that this secret colony was not so secret. James Adair, Hebrew name, the Indian trader, made a beeline for Chickasaw territory shortly after arriving in South Carolina. He developed a strong connection to the Chickasaw, winning the tribe over as staunch allies of the British. Around 1745, this is a so-called black man, okay? An alliance with the Chickasaw, right? Other people of color. Around 1745, he established operations in Piomingo, in North Mississippi, then a mixed Choctaw and Chickasaw town. He later wrote, all right, Piomingo what? Mississippi was what? A Choctaw and Chickasaw town. He later wrote, I have the pleasure of writing this, his famous book, History of the American Indians, all right? Go make sure to read that book. He lived amongst a lot of your ancestors for 40 years, and he noticed certain things when he was living amongst them that they were practicing. And this is a Sephardic Jew. So he definitely knew when he saw people doing things that he actually only read about in Bibles. He came and saw the people actually practicing it. Where they get it from? They got it from the source because they are the seed. You get it? So he wrote History of the American Indians by the side of a Chickasaw female, his wife, Chickasaw female, as great a princess as ever lived. All right. And these authors were also mentioning that she might have been also of half. So her mom Indian and her dad might have been same Sephardic Moorish people, but from before. Elsewhere, he notes that there were already adults in that country who were octoroons or 1/8 Indians, and this is what I was just mentioning. He wrote that. Adair was admitting that during his time, the Indian white intermarriage, to hijack white, I mean European, necessary to produce a half-breed of this description must have occurred at least 3 generations before, about 1720. The time of the Mississippi bubble. We have already seen how Adair's contemporary and countryman, the Scottish adventurer Sir Alexander Cummins, proposed to settle Eastern Europe's Jews in the same area. So the authors are making this connection. Remember, these people were sent there, these so-called Jews and Gypsies, and nobody knows what happens, right? They were just abandoned. And Adair, by the time Adair got there, he said there was already some people that were the Indians that were mixed. So it kind of matches the same period when these people were kind of brought there in the 1720s, the Mississippi bubble. The Encyclopedia of Southern Culture confirms that the oldest Jewish communities in the South were not on the Atlantic or Gulf Coast, but in the middle Mississippi River Valley. The first Jews lived on the St. Francis and Arkansas River, an outpost originally Spanish or French, Natchez, New Madrid, Kaskaskia, Cape Girondu, and Memphis. These are all Jewish ghost towns now, all right? Ghost towns now. What? So-called Jewish, Hebrew, so-called Jewish, so-called colored ghost towns now. People of color, yeah. Yeah, ghost towns now. How convenient. They're ghost towns now. Like ruins on the Caribbean islands that once held the first synagogues of the New World. And that was also by Sephardic Jews. We've got all the info in the previous videos. Make sure you guys go back. It's a lot of good information, not just from this book, from all the correlation we've done. Today, there are only 25 Jews in Natchez. The city's Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience stands as a lonely tribute to Mississippi's Jewish pioneers. And we continue, says the plot thickens. A connection between Jews on the Mississippi and Georgia emerges from a stray reference in the Board of Governors records of 1750. The Frenchman Isaac Lebon, Hebrew for white or blonde, Leonard Bodley, Boudel or Bodel, Anthony Pages, and Anthony Lesage, or wise ways, sage, wise man, Wisman, are recorded as arriving in Savannah on the ship the Charming Martha from London. The Board of Governors had appropriated a choice piece of land fitting for their purposes, and had also desired Mr. Jean Sack, Hebrew anagram for Serah Kodesh, holy seed, an old inhabitant of this colony, a countryman of theirs, to assist them. One might ask why a Frenchman were granted lands in Georgia at a time when Britain was engaged in a bitter struggle with France. That's a good question. Why are they giving land to so-called Frenchmen, in parentheses? Because remember, a lot of these people are the same people. They're Sephardic Moorish people. They were living in France. They were living in England, you know, but they were the same people. They were just being called French, Irish, English, right? But they weren't so Irish, so English, so French. A lot of them were, again, descendants of the diaspora of the Sephardic Jews and Moorish people out of Portugal and Spain after the Spanish Inquisition. A lot of them fled also north, not just to Africa. Okay? So why were they given land? Good question. To Frenchmen when they had beef, supposedly, the two countries. One that would only end with that country's surrender and complete withdrawal from North America. Although these Frenchmen may have been outwardly Huguenots, it is apparent from their names that they were Sephardic Jews underneath the Protestant veneer. All right? Underneath their tag as Huguenots or Protestants, they were actually, a lot of them were Sephardic Moorish Jews. All right. So real quick, we're just going to come to this book just for correlation. They just mentioned the Huguenots were actually, a lot of them were Sephardic Jewish people. The Huguenots were people of color. All right. We got another source here. We're going to get into this book real quick. We've gone over it before. All right. This book is The History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors, with a sketch of the civilization which they achieved and imparted to Europe, by Henry Coffey in 2 volumes. This volume 2, this is from 1892. On page 445 of this book, they're talking about Christopher Columbus, the Christ bearer. You know, that's not his real name. That's just a title. We're looking into the Sarko family. Yeah, the Sarko, Portuguese Jew. Yeah, Sephardic Jew. Yeah, the real one. Now they're saying how his vessel was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were, many of them, with Moorish blood in their veins. Moorish blood, so-called Negroes, right? Conquistadors, right? Who came with Columbus, supposedly? Conquistadors, right? Columbus himself is a Portuguese Jew, Sephardic Jew. It has been asserted that when the Moors, right, the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorrent the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. They became what? Huguenots. And that of these, many emigrated at a later date to South Carolina. Okay? South Carolina and eventually to Georgia. Huguenots. We were just reading, right? So again, these so-called Frenchmen that were going to Georgia may have been outwardly Huguenots. Even though they may have been outwardly Huguenots who are Moorish people, it is apparent from their names that they were Sephardic Jews underneath the Protestant veneer. Same people coming out of Spain and Portugal. protesting the Roman Catholic persecutions, as they just told us, the Inquisition. The subsequent history of one of them will illustrate this. Isaac Laban was a half-breed, believed to be the son of a French or English trader, Jean or John Lebeau, and the daughter of a Choctaw chief. All right, listen, genealogy. His sister Malaya, Hebrew name meaning full, ripe, buxom, married William Cooper, the Jewish scout and guide for Daniel Boone. William and Malaya are common ancestors of both authors. All right, and even though these authors may be white today, they're descending, literally they're telling you they're descending from black folks, okay? Isaac later moved to Philadelphia and then to Watauga Country, where he signed a petition from the north of Holston men to the president in 1777. There the Labans changed the family name to White. Isaac White, Isaac Laban's son, born 1752, settled in Jonesboro in Washington County and fought as lieutenant at Kings Mountain in October 1780. When Chickasaw lands were returned to Spain in 1781, the Coopers, Americanized but still able to speak Spanish, all right? Again, the Coopers, which had already become Americanized, but they were still able to speak Spanish, received grants and operated profitable tobacco plantations in what is now the tri-state area of Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. Both the Coopers and Labans provide good examples of crypto Jews, all right? Sephardic people Protestants, so-called Protestants, but they're crypto Jews. They had converted to Christianity. Chameleon-like ability to adopt different personae to suit the occasion. All right, chameleon-like the Huguenots, crypto Jews, crypto Muslims. All right, in British Colonial America. Chameleon-like ability to adopt different persona to suit the occasion. The Coopers alternated between claiming to be British, Portuguese, French, Spanish, and American, and gave their origin variously as Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Kentucky. They explained the Indian admixture in the family as Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Black Dutch, and Black Irish. All right, listen to this. The Coopers, that's all there in their genealogy. Cooper is considered a Melungeon surname, as is White, the Melungeons. By the 1800s, there was just one town of half-breeds left, the term used for Chickasaws in British treaties and trade records since about 1720. They were calling the Chickasaws half-breeds in the British treaties and trade records of 1720. It is mentioned in the memoirs of a steamboat captain as still in existence at the former French fort below what the steamboat captains called the Four Bluffs on the Mississippi, just south of Memphis. Fort Pickering stands on the left side of the river in the Mississippi Territory. The United States have a factor here, but the settlement is very thin. It generally consists of what is called the half-breed, which is a mixture of Indians and whites, not whites, but Europeans. Europeans, they mean, settlers, colonists. Significantly, the earliest name given to this region by the Cumberland and Watauga country settlers was Moro District. Again, all right, do I need to explain what Moro means? The Moorish District. So again, they're not talking about whites. When they're just saying Europeans, they're calling all these Europeans white because they want us to assume. Remember, they got to dodge the hijack. Let's not forget, in the mining of a hijack. But it was called Moro District, the Moorish District. It may be this colony that Choctaw Chief Apums Shunubi refers to in the 1790s when he tells the Indian agent, "You Americans were not the first European people who got this country from the red people. We sold our lands but never got any value for it." Under the name half-breeds, Chickasaws helped found Augusta and secure the Indian trade from both the Spanish and French. Half-breeds also defended Augusta in the Cherokee War of 1759 and 1760. To reward them for fighting the Spanish in 1735 and later rebuffing the Cherokee, Georgia gave them large grants of land on the north bank of the Savannah River, okay, for fighting in these wars. They got grants. These are half indigenous people, half black Europeans. They want to call them half-breed. I don't know if that sounds good, you know. Could be families rejoining from ancient times, right? But either way, that's what they're calling them. And they got large grants of land north bank of the Savannah River. The half-breeds, it says mixed Chickasaws, the Jews and Gypsies. Again, they're calling them, that's what they're calling the Chickasaws, who mixed with the Jews and Gypsies, held these plantations, all right? Who was the plantation owners? They held these plantations until the 1790s, before the 1800s, right? For the reset, before the world fairs and everything, right? Today, the descendants of this colony in North Augusta, South Carolina, compose one of the largest Romani gypsy communities in the United States. Romani, all right, we got a future video on these ancient Romani people, so-called gypsies. Where were they really coming from? That's what I was saying. Could be ancient families reuniting. Perhaps a vestige of William Law's pool of settlers. Significantly, Roma people regard Memphis as one of the most desirable places to be buried in the United States, possibly because their ancestors were interred in that area following France's Mississippi Bubble colony. All right, but don't get confused because these were people of color back then. These developments of the frontier can be better understood if we look at some of the standard historical accounts of Georgia. It was a colony long in search of itself. The early years can be divided into three periods: trusteeship from 1733 to 1748, interim from 1748 to 1754, and royal period from 1755 to 1776. Although established with high-minded ideals, the Georgia colony repeatedly seemed to go awry. Under its charter, colonists enjoyed the free exercise of religion, except Papists, but the first Anglican church was not dedicated until 1750. In the meantime, Jews, Salzburgers, and others had created their own places of worship. There was to be no slavery, rum, or swearing, but the outpost of Augusta was a law unto itself. Half of Georgia's population were slaves by the time of the American Revolution, indentured servants. At first, outright ownership of land was prohibited. All grants were made in tail mail, meaning property could not be transferred to anyone other than the first grantee's male heirs. This simply encouraged squatters, illegal homesteaders, and even fraudulent speculators. What happened? Squatters came. Squatters, illegal homesteaders, and fraudulent speculators. Quintrents were supposed to be paid to the king, but no one bothered to do so. The colonists revolted over the land policies of the trustees as early as 1738, and in 1742 sent Thomas Stevens to lay their complaints before Parliament. England turned a deaf ear and blind eye to all. It says here, absentee government. When we continue in the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, we're in chapter 9. Georgia, the last colony. The founder, James Oglethorpe, stayed in Georgia for 10 years until the border with Spain was secured. Except for him, no trustee ever laid eyes on Georgia. The trustees were in fact prevented by the bylaws from visiting the colony or having any financial interest in it. After about 1740, they met infrequently and often could not muster a quorum. Who exact were these overseers of the last colony? According to the charter of King George II, they were, at the outset, John Lord Viscount Percival, Edward Digby, George Carpenter, James Oglethorpe, George Heathcote, Thomas Tower, from the letter Tau, Robert Moore from Moore, Moore, Robert Hux from Jacob, Roger Holland from the Netherlands, William Sloper, Polish, Francis Isles, Arabic, John LaRoche, Roca, James Vernon, William Belita, Arabic, John Burton, Richard Bundy, Bundy. All right, the Bundys. All right, listen, Bundy. Yeah, Al Bundy. Yeah. Arthur Bedford, Samuel Smith, Adam Anderson, and Thomas Coram, Hebrew. Others were added to the list later on, including Anthony Ashley Cooper, Jewish name, 4th Earl of Shaftesbury, Henry L. Apostry, French Huguenot Moore, Samuel Smith, and Stephen Haley's Arabic name. The secretary throughout the years was Benjamin Martin. The accountant was Harmon, Dutch Jewish form of Hiram, a name from Jewish legend and Freemasonry. Verelst, Again, these are the colonists in Georgia. Sephardic Moorish people. From the list of 115 individual names representing the first arrivals on the Annie in February 1733, one can discern many that could potentially point to Jewish and crypto-Jewish roots. Note Bolin, Hebrew, bath keeper, Cooper, Fox, Gordon, a corruption of Cohen, Hughes, Ellis, Arabic, Little, Moore or Moore, Pratt, Sammy, Symes, Wallace, and West. Henry Ellis, known as the second founder of Georgia, was the colony's second governor, 1757 to 1760. Silk was to be Georgia's mainstay. As early as 1732, the trustees approached the London silk manufacturer Thomas Lombard for advice. After some difficulty, they secured the services of Paul Amatis, Italian silkman, gardener, and silk care. Amatis introduced silkworms to the colony and taught others the proprietary art of silk manufacture. All right, silk. That was a Moorish trade, Sephardic trade and Moorish trade. All right. But did they realize that the Amatis family was not so much Italian, although domiciled in Livorno, Rome, Florence, and Genzano, but Sephardic Jews? Did they know that they were actually Sephardic Jews that were living in Italy? Another silk expert brought to the colonies was Joseph Solomon Ottolenghi. He began life as a kosher butcher in Italy, and although he converted to Christianity in Georgia, where in Georgia, crypto Jew, the rest of his family and descendants remained Jewish, so-called Jewish, right? Wherever we look, silk formed part of the triad along with wine and olive oil, which was supposed to be the salvation of the southern colonies. All these occupations were developed and dominated by Spanish Jews, okay? Silk manufacture was established by medieval Jews who learned the art of the famous Silk Road to China. Their secrets were passed after 1492 to the Huguenots, all right? So-called Huguenots in parentheses, as you see there, Moorish people, a denomination superficially espoused by Paul Amatis. In South Carolina, a number of families, including the Hugers, Legaries, the Legendaries, the Manigolds, the Masiques, Mashig, Algerian, and Motis, Mota de la Mota, Portuguese Jews, who also came to Savannah, settled under the pretext of introducing the silk manufacturing industry. They became Charleston's leading money lenders. All these people of color in Charleston, remember, Charleston was a free person of color town. Who was giving them the money? It was these people right here coming out of Georgia. They were the money lenders, factors, and shippers. Professions that once again point to Jewish roots. Who owned the ships? Remember the crypto Jews and the port Jews, they had all the connections. Remember in the Atlantic, two apparent Jewesses or crypto Jewesses involved in the silk profession in Georgia were the Italian silk winder Jane Marie Camus, French Camus, and the mixed breed interpreter, diplomat, and trader Mary Musgrove, who passed into history as Creek Mary. All right, Creek Mary. She was what? In so-called Italian, she was crypto Jewess, Creek Mary. Yeah. Savannah's Jews. The boatload of 42 Jewish settlers who landed in Savannah on July 11, 1733, and immediately established North America's third Jewish congregation after New York and Newport, Rhode Island, was the exception to the trustees' policies that proved the rule. There was nothing specifically including Jews in Georgia's charter. Only Catholics and slaves were prohibited, not the Jews, huh? Hence, in the spirit of what the law does not forbid, it permits. A group of wealthy merchants, who's the merchants of London Spanish Portuguese congregation at Bevis Marks, collected funds and sponsored their fellow Jews' passage. Who? Spanish Portuguese congregation, people who were from Spanish and Portuguese Jewish descent. These were Moorish people, people of color living in London. They were wealthy merchants. Remember, they established the London Company and all that. Wealthy merchants. They sponsored their other family or their other people for the passage to Georgia. There were Sephardim and Ashkenazim, rich and poor, men, women, and children, granted either permanent or temporary residency. This occurred only 5 months after the arrival of the first 115 settlers. Upon disembarkation, the Jews formed about 1/4 of the colony. We ain't talking about just light-skinned, pale-skinned, so-called Jews. They are gratefully remembered for introducing standards of hygiene, building housing, and providing rudimentary medical services. At the time, however, the Jews were not greatly appreciated. The trustees wrathfully summoned those held responsible: Alvaro Lopez Suazo, Francis Salvador Jr., and Anthony da Costa. I remember the Da Costas, Black Irish family. They were Portuguese Jews, crypto Jews. We got a video on them. Others say the three were spearheaded the development were Moses da Costa, Joseph Rodriguez Sequeira, and Jacob Israel Suazo. All right, you hear the names? The trustees' language, however, shows they were willing to accept wealthy merchants, just not certain Jews. They pretended to conceive the settling of Jews in Georgia will be prejudicial to the colony, and as some have been sent without the knowledge of the trustees, they demanded that the Jews be removed from the colony of Georgia. For such an indignity offered to the gentleman acting under His Majesty's charter. That the Savannah Jews were not deported suggests that their London counterparts were able to iron out the situation with diplomacy and probably a timely transfer of money to the trustees' charities. All right, they paid them. All right, hold on. How much do you want for them? Please let us keep them there. The history of Savannah Jewry lies beyond the purview of this book, but to lend weight to the suspicion that Georgia may have been the most Jewish of the colonies, let us recount some of the famous Jews in its history. We have already noted the silk expert Paul Amatis and Joseph Ottolenghi, who strictly speaking were crypto Jews, a practicing Jew, Abraham de Leon, who arrived with Bevis Marks Jews, was hired to nourish viniculture after the first vintner failed. His wife was Esther Nunez, all right, Nunez, daughter of Moses Nunez, a prominent Mason and customs officer for the port. That's a port Jew right there, literally. All right, Portuguese Jew Nunez. Their children married into the Jewish mercantile aristocracy of the colonies, the Levi, the Cohen, Moses, Mordecai, Brandon, Seixas, Hendricks, Machado, Phillips, and Russell families, okay? Prominent Jewish aristocratic mercantile families. People of color. One descendant, Raphael Moses of Columbus, Georgia, is considered the father of Georgia's peach industry. The peach industry, Raphael Moises, okay? Peach industry in Georgia, the father. Benjamin Taliaferro. I found a lot of these names in people's genealogy when we go farther back. A lot of these are very prominent people that you do find in your genealogy. Once you get past that barrier they put up in the 1840s, 1830s, one more generation and it gets you to these people right here. Benjamin Taliaferro fought in the Revolution and a county was named for him. The Scottish Telfair family, a name derived from Taliaferro, was one of Savannah's wealthiest, bequeathing to the city their mansion, now the Telfair Museum of Art. Edward Telfair was governor 1786 to 87 and 1789 to 1793. Dr. Patrick Telfair fled Savannah with the Sephardic Jews at the threat of Spanish invasion and the return of the Inquisition in 1740. Listen to what happened, all right? They were fleeing from who? The Catholics. These were people of color, these were Sephardic Jews. The Catholics were coming for them. An indication, perhaps, of his religious affinity. David Emanuel was Justice of the Peace in St. George Parish in 1776 and later became the 6th governor of Georgia, also having a county named after him. James Lucena was Justice of the Peace in Christchurch Parish in 1773. All these were Christian oaths of office, an indication that the road to integration in American society lay through conversion or apparent conversion. Again, these were Sephardic Moorish people, and they had to be secret Christians. You know, they had to give an oath to Christianity, and that's what it was making them successful. That's how or apparent conversion, right? They would pretend to convert. That's why they're called crypto. That did not change the fact, however, that their roots were Jewish, Sephardic Jewish, Portuguese, Spanish Jews. After 1730, more Jews arrived in Georgia, some to stay in Savannah, some to settle in the hinterland. The officials in London mistakenly attributed every Jew's arrival to the date 10 July 1733, when the first boatload of Jews made landfall. For instance, they recorded the Aberdeen Bandenoon family under that date. Their name comes from Abenomen, a town near Toledo. According to the trustee's note, Haman Aberdeen, Jew inmate, came with Abigail, his wife Solomon, their son, and Simon Aberdeen, also called a Jew inmate, with Simon's wife Grace. Haman and Simon Aberdeen were fined for scandal and defamation. 27 of September 1734. They and their families fled Savannah in 1740 during the War of Jenkins' Ear, when it seemed the Spaniards would take over the colony and introduce the Inquisition. Another was Moses Ledesma, also said to have arrived with his family 10 July 1733. Altogether, chroniclers Coulter and Saye count 92 of the settlers who paid their own passage as Jews, more than twice the number of Jews, 42, who came in 1733. Some of the names of these unstudied Georgia Jews are Isaac Duvall, settled at Hempstead, David and Hester Frosis, John Benjamin and Thomas Levi, David Mendoza and Abraham Monsanto, all right, like the food, right, Monsanto. By 1738, only 5 years after its establishment, Georgia had 1,110 inhabitants. Official settlement hugged the coast, particularly the environs of Savannah. There were 20 plantations within a radius of 20 miles inland. A notable village in the interior was Abercorn, 15 miles north. The Salzburgers' grant of land, called Ebenezer, was 35 miles upriver. There were only about 200 residents at that time. At a considerable distance was Augusta, the great resort of traders and Indians. Augusta, a resort, the great resort of the traders and the Indians, Augusta, Georgia. To the south lay the lonely Scottish outpost of New Inverness on the Altamaha River, renamed Darien on the Altamaha River, Scottish outpost, Altamaha River, renamed Darien. Salzburgers. The story of Purisburg has been told before. It is suspected that some, if not many, of the Swiss colonists were crypto-Jews or converted Jews, these so-called Swiss. Georgia's answer to South Carolina's Purisburg was Ebenezer, a colony formed by transports, a group of refugees traveling together. That's what it was based off, all right? This planned so-called colony, Ebenezer. A German Lutherans. So a group of refugees of German Lutherans from the trustees rescued from wandering exile after their expulsion from Salzburg by the Catholic Archbishop. All right, again, persecuted by the Catholic. These were Sephardic Moorish people. Okay, German Lutherans, now converted. As Reuben notices, there was a good deal of similarity and sympathy between the Salzburgers and the Jews. In the first place, although not commonly appreciated, the Salzburgers were not all from Salzburg. Second, the original refugees wandered for years throughout Central and Western Europe before the trustees took on their cause. They were traveling through Europe. They weren't really from there. In the meantime, they were helped along the way by German Jews who collected money for them, fed and clothed them. In one town, local Jews presented them with a gift of 4,000 thalers. The Salzburgers were also received kindly by Jews in Frankfurt, Coburg, Würzburg, and Bamberg, all thriving centers of German Jewry at the time. Remember, we've read this, how they were helping their fellow people during their diaspora, during the Spanish Inquisition. They will let them, stay in their places until they can move on, feed them, help them until they can get eventually to America. It seems some of the Jews who identified with the Salzburgers were beyond good wishes and actually joined the swelling Exodus, whose numbers may have included crypto-Jews and Huguenots from the start, all right? These people were what? Huguenots and crypto-Jews, a lot of them already. but they came in as Swiss, right? As Swiss, as German Lutherans. Their chronicler, George F. Jones, lists 15 transports to Ebenezer between 1734 and 1752, only 4 of which are specifically labeled Salzburgers. The remaining 11 carried what? Moravians, Palatines, Swiss, and Swabians, although even these designations were very rough, and there were a number of Ashkenazim or German Jews. All right, so you see how they separated the Ashkenazi or German Jews from the other people, right? They've been talking about Jews this whole time, but they weren't talking about specifically Ashkenazim, because they said there was even Ashkenazis among the other Jews. And amongst the Moravians, Moravians, future video, Moravians. Who's the Moravians? Just like the Huguenots, you guys are going to see how deep it goes with the Moravians. Palatines, we already know, people of color, the German Palatines, Benjamin Franklin was complaining about. He said, why are we going to keep sending these Boers over here and Germanize America? They're not even our complexion. And the Swiss, we know a lot of those are crypto Jews, and the Swabians. We've already got the info before. Continuing, says the Saftekleben party came over en masse from Silesia and Poland in 1739. Table 3 in Appendix K lists the names of some of the Ebenezer colonists we have reason to believe are of Jewish extraction, and perhaps still of Jewish faith and practices, although secretive about it. Cryptos. One of the first things we notice from the list is intermarriage between certain families, all right? That happened a lot. We suggest families like Brangner, Frerl, Helfenstein, Ulsent, Trultlen, Zorn, Heinle, Fischer, Dasher, and Scroopdrain were descendants of Jews who superficially converted to Christianity in response to late medieval pogroms in the Rhineland and Bavaria. All right, medieval, we're talking about what's those coat of arms I showed you in this land, the Rhineland, Bavaria land. I showed you coat of arms from the medieval times. I showed you it's all black folks on these coat of arms. Some of them labeled Swiss or Swabian or Salzburgers are obviously not from Switzerland, Swabia, or Salzburg, except in an adoptive sense. This must certainly be the case with the large Gunther, actually Gindrich family, said to be the Palatines, that they are French Huguenots, all right? These Palatines, a lot of them, what are French Huguenots, Moors, who originated as Spanish or Portuguese Jews, all right, Moorish people, is suggested by the marriage partner of one Gunther Anna Munford. Their name may have once been Guindi or Gundi, all right? They were what? French Huguenots who were coming from Spain and Portugal. So-called people of color, Moors, right? Remember, we just read the book earlier, Moors. So the Huguenots are Sephardic Jews and Moors, okay? Some of the Salzburgers have transparently Sephardic surnames. For instance, Pham, Fau, Lion, De Leon, and Faesh, Fez. Others have names documented to be German, Scottish, French, Flemish, or Alsatian Jewish. What is most striking is how these various nationalities converged on Ebenezer, Bethany, and the resultant satellite communities within such a short span of years. We find instances of communication and trade between the Salzburgers and the Savannah Jews. At least one, Swiss Baptist, goes back to Germany and then returns to Georgia. With more immigrants? Some of those arriving in Ebenezer gravitated to it from Pennsylvania Dutch territory, and their families had been in the colony since 1710. Those of Sephardic surname married those of Ashkenazic surname, That's when they started taking over. Frenchmen married Germans, despite the traditional antipathy between the two countries, because they're the same people. They're not really Frenchmen or Germans. Some settlers defect from the British Army. Others arrange their own passage with a ship captain, and a large number moving from Purisburg. And then, as often happens, once gathered together, they move on. 2 Jewish settlements in what became Florida, Flato and Grunau, owe their existence to those Salzburgers and their kin, all right? You see that? Those towns in Florida, those settlements, the Sephardic Jews. Prior to the surrender of the charter, writes Rabbi R.H. Levi, the trustees had sent to Georgia over 5,500 colonists, 5,500, of whom about 3,500 had come at their own expense. The first list in Coulter and Sayegh covers those who went to Georgia at the trustee's charge, while the second contained the name of those who went from Europe to Georgia on their own account. Levi notes that by 1752, many of these colonists had either died or left Georgia, but about 3,000 people remained in the colony, including approximately 800 Negroes. All right, that's the hijack. From these figures, it is apparent that the bulk of Georgia's settlers were not the charity cases the trustees had in mind at the beginning. Moreover, many colonists disembarking at Savannah moved on, like Maryland with its lax religious restrictions. Georgia, with its absence of central authority, seemed to beckon to those of a fluid background. Although the original charter was set to expire in 1753, interest on the trustees' part in their distant experiment became so vaporous that Parliament abruptly eliminated their budget and dissolved the company 2 years early. Georgia became a royal colony. The interim period of 1748 to 1754 saw an overweening disregard for any directives from the mother country. In 1750, all titles to grants previously made in tail-mail were converted to fee simple. In the months prior to June 23, 1752, when the king was supposed to take control, 75,000 acres of land were granted by the Board of Governors in Savannah to all manner of takers. To all manner of takers. It says here, Slides of Colonial Life. Volume 6 of the Colonial Records of the State of Georgia, covering the years 1741 to 1754, provide us a window on this type of immigrant. In the following list are the names of persons, usually land grantees, whom we regard as possible or probable Jewish or crypto-Jewish origins. We make reference to two of the authorities on Jewish names, Fuggenboom, etc., All and Menck, as well as to Stern's 1991 Compendium of Colonial American Jewish Genealogy. It says here, names from the Board of Governors minutes 1741 to 1754. And as you guys can see, the names, right? Stephen Idy, Ajah, merchant from St. Kitts, a merchant. Francis Arthur, merchant. John Ashmore, Augustine, Bagshaw, Barbo, Barksdale, Barnard, Creek traders, Indian trader, Baruch, Barksdale is Baruch, Benison. All right, so you guys can like pause this and take a look and look at the different ones. Thomas Collins, Melungeon, Richard Cooper, Ogeechee River, Jeremiah Courong, Indian trader, Richard Cox, a merchant from Nevis. All right, you see these are the colonists. A lot of them were Sephardic and Moorish people, you see. This is what they didn't tell you in school. They wanted you to picture all white, English or French or German people, Dutch people, but as pale skin, you know, and it was all a lie. These are the actual genealogy of the people. Again, some other ones. Elizabeth Boland, Hebrew, for ball and bath keeper. Isaac Bradband, town in Flanders silk. Joseph Borges, trader originally from Darien. Says John Caldwell, Ocala trader and Cherokee Indian agent. All right. Says Maurice Dooley, black and Irish. And some more lists right here. Again, you go ahead and feel free to pause the video, take a good look. All right. The different names. You see your name there, you know, research it. You know, don't leave this side out of your genealogy. These might be one of your ancestors right here as well. If you have this surname in this area, you can look it up. All right, in case you're missing it. A lot of them, again, these are Sephardic Jewish Moorish people. All right, that was listed there. James Stewart, the Stewarts, the Highlanders, right? Indian agent, Dutchman, Splitterman, Dutchman. Oliver Shaw, Persian for king. All right, so go ahead and make sure to get all these names and pause it if you like to see it. It says the presence of so many of these surnames in Stern's genealogies is striking to say the least. Stern devotes whole pages to the Frankses, Harrises, Clarks, the Coopers, and others in the list. It is possible to trace a strong Scottish, Jewish, or crypto-Jewish presence with names such as Gordon, Kennedy, Stewart, and Fraser. Georgia was apparently the prime meeting place for Scottish and Iberian Jews. Again, Georgia was apparently the prime meeting place for Scottish and Iberian Jews. Several of these newcomers arrived from the Caribbean islands, all right? They came from the Caribbean islands. Remember, on British governed Nevis, 1/4 of the inhabitants were Jewish. Sephardic Jews named Senior, Recio, Israel, Mendes, Lobato, Arrobas, and the Mesquita had been leaders in the development of the sugar industry on that island. Remember who started the sugar plantations? It was Sephardic Moorish people. They controlled this industry back before they were even sent out to the Caribbeans to establish it in Brazil and the Caribbean. You know, once the Catholics came in town after they had already set up shop, you know, they kicked them out of these places and they ended up going up to different places in the Caribbean like Nevis and up eventually into Georgia, South Carolina, and New York and other places, Virginia. But these were the people helping to develop the sugar industry on this specific island, right? As Jewish historian Mordecai Arbel notes, however, the decline of the Nevis Jewish population began in the second half of the 18th century, right? 1700s. The sugar trade declined and Nevis Jews had to look for new prospects. What happened to them? They had to bounce or look for another hustle. Portuguese and Dutch Jews constantly had to relocate as islands changed hands. Okay, that's what I was just talking about. We've read a lot about this in my previous videos, how these people were being kicked out of these specific places after they were already living there. And a lot of them, again, ended up in North America. So again, as it says here, Portuguese and Dutch Jews constantly had to relocate as islands changed hands. Moreover, Jewish commercial competition was so greatly feared that when British merchants first entered a new field, they often imposed tariffs on the Jewish traders that forced them to close their doors. Similar reasons probably motivated groups from St. Kitts, which was British, and St. Croix, which the Danes had recently purchased from the French, retaining and encouraging the former Dutch settlement. These were international merchants whose only common denominator seems to be Jewish roots or connections. Anthony Fahey, John Ham, Lewis Johnson, Alexander Lowe, and Edmund Tennant arrived as a single party from St. Kitts. Likewise, the four Frenchmen, right in parentheses, Isaac Le Bon, Leonard Botley, Anthony Pages, and Anthony Lesage took passage from London together, evidently at the urging of a fellow Jew already established in the vicinity. Many of the land grantees during these years simply crossed the river from the Purisburg colony in South Carolina. Some of the names found both in Purisburg and Georgia are Borquin or Borguin, Costa, right, like De La Costa or Da Costa, Roche or Rochi, Farre, Frank, Galachi, Generet, Gendra, Abraham, a trader perhaps, Gundry, Michel or Michael, Nichols, Nicholas, Perry Espadeda, same family, Shepherd, and Tanner. The names and gravestones, treatments in the Purisburg Cemetery testify to a blending of Scottish and continental Jews in the settlement. Continuing in the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, it says here, we're in chapter 9, remember, Georgia, the last colony. It says here, Augusta, settled or unsettled. The frontier town of Augusta had a different character from the rest of Georgia. It actually preceded the foundation of Savannah by several decades, so was first, having taken shape as Savannah town on the north side of the river, where Fort Moore was built in 1750, Fort Moore. In 1720, as we have noted, Chickasaws, or half-breeds as they're calling them, living in northern Mississippi, were invited by the South Carolina Assembly to occupy the area. They stayed until after the Revolutionary War. Now remember, they're saying half-breeds because they're saying they had mixed with these Jews and gypsies that had been sent over there. The trade monopoly called the Company of Seven Persons at Augusta ran the outpost as a private of chiefdom or fiefdom. As trade history scholar Catherine Holland Braun has written, this monopoly underwent numerous name changes as new partners came on board, but remained basically the same inner sanctum of Scotsmen. We would say crypto-Jewish Scotsmen. Its best-known phase was probably Brown, Rye and Company. In later years, it produced what became the behemoth Pensacola-based trading house of Penton, Leslie and Company, reorganized as John Forbes and Company. All these Scottish, presumably Jewish, families were heavily intermarried across generations. They were marrying each other. Among the Augusta Indian traders known from Hicks' works are Isaac Barksdale, Edward, John and Timothy Barnard, Joseph Burgess, John Caldwell, Daniel Clark, William Joseph, Richard Cooper, Jeremiah Corton, William Dews, Joshua Francis, James Fraser, George Galpin or Galpring, Robert Gandy, James Germany, John Gerard, Lachlan McGillivray, Richard Paris, John Ray, Jordan Roach, William Tennant, John Stewart, and Eleazar Wigan. As is apparent, many of these are Sephardic surnames. An example of Scottish-Portuguese Jewish alliance occurs in the career of George Galpin, 1700 to 1780. Probably originally Galpin, an Ashkenazi name, Galpin was born in County Armagh, Ireland, left a wife and emigrated to Georgia, where he married the illegitimate quadroon daughter of Moses Nunez in Savannah. Moses Nunez, quadroon, meaning mixed with Indians, not with Africans, meaning mixed with Indians. All right, Portuguese, Sephardic Jews, Moses Nunez's daughter, right? Meaning he was already mixed himself, if that's her dad, or maybe through her mom's side, the Indian. With various partners, he formed the Augusta Trading Company, Galpin Homes and Company. Another trader who was apparently crypto-Jewish was Francis Harris. He arrived in Savannah shortly after its foundation, about 1740, becoming the manager of the trustees' store until the trustees discontinued the business. In the mid-40s, he formed a trading firm in partnership with James Habersham, a close friend. Harris and Habersham is generally seen as the first mercantile and shipping firm in Georgia. Although the Jew Abraham Minus maintained his store in Savannah and owned one or more ships, such operations were frowned upon by the trustees, at least in theory. Indian traders active in Georgia also include John and Daniel Ross, Christian Russell, a Cilician, example Cilician Ashkenazi, Nicholas White, a native of Marsalis, but resident in this nation, Creek Confederacy, okay? Listen to that. A native of France, Marsalis, but he was in the Creek Confederacy for 30 years. Abraham M. Mordecai, a Jew of bad character, according to Indian agent Benjamin Hawkins, but an intelligent Jew, according to Albert James Pickett, author of the History of Alabama. Miss Durant, a female trader, Obadiah Lowe, Cornelius Dougherty, a Jacobite, again a Jacobite, said to be the first trader or one of the first among the Cherokee, so-called Cherokee, John Van, later an important Cherokee mixed blood family, okay, the Vans, James Leslie, James Lewis, Aaron Harrod, Zechariah Cox, a land developer, Richard Sparks, a captain at Tellico Blockhouse in Cherokee Upcountry. Cox is considered a Melungeon name. Davis, a blacksmith. John Marino, like Dan Marino, right? John Marino, a Spaniard. Marine, Moore, a Spaniard. John Beamer, B. Moore, a Huguenot, whose original Sephardic name was probably Benamor, and whose Cherokee son was known as Musty or mixed breed, okay? Again, these people are not being called Musties or mulattoes or half-breed because they're being mixed with black Africans, so-called black Africans, right, or slaves. It's because they're being mixed with indigenous people of America. Thomas Nirney, Arabic, James McQueen, corruption of McCohen, son of Cohen, John McKee, John McKee, the famous McKees, all right, future video, Alexander Long, Robert Bonin, Bondurant, Greenwood LeFleur Flores, Benjamin Perryman, Mixed Blood, Hardy Perryman, introduced cattle among the Choctaw, William Dixon Moniac, originally Jacob Monarchy from Munich, Germany, and John Shepard, also considered a Melungeon name. To defend the southern frontier against the Spanish, Oglethorpe planted a military colony of Highlanders at the mouth of the Altamaha River. Highlanders, ex-Jacobites at the Altamaha River, Highlanders, Scottish Highlanders, called New Inverness. The settlement was later renamed Darien after a failed Scottish colony in Panama. That's what they tried to do over there in Panama. The Scotsmen who became pioneers there reflect the clans we have suggested as having Jewish roots on the basis of DNA analysis and other factors. Among these apparently crypto-Jewish family names are Bain, Bean or MacBean, Caldwell, Campbell, Forbes, Fraser, McKay, Morrison, Sinclair, and Stewart. We have noticed several times how the British relied on Jews and crypto-Jews, deeply embedded hatred on the Spanish. Many of the Darien settlers and Augusta traders were from Aberdeen, where refugees, Spanish, Jews, and Muslims were, okay? Aberdeen, who was living in Aberdeen, Scotland? Who was these people that came into the Altamaha River? They were what? Spanish, Jews, and Muslims. As we have argued, welcomed by the largely crypto-Jewish city leaders, the Scottish Jews were evidently still fighting these old battles. To judge from the rallying cry of Darien they chose for their new town. All right, they were still being persecuted by the Catholics. In the interim period between rule by the trustees and a royal governor, land speculation went wild. Large grants were made to new arrivals. A group of Germans led by John G. W. de Brom lost no time in slipping through the gap. They settled at Bethany, a place name made famous in the Holy Land during the Crusades, not far from the Salzburgers. In 1768, a group of Irish Protestants founded Queensborough on the Ogeechee River. Irish Protestants, all right? Who's the Protestants? Remember, so-called Irish, huh? Just like the Costas were being called Irish mulattoes, huh? But they were Costas, they were Portuguese Jews. The settlement was co-sponsored by traders George Galpin, John Ray, Lachlan McGillivray. As such, it was not so much Irish as Scottish and crypto-Jewish. Although this characterization of its history is probably unwelcome news to the Center for Irish Studies at Georgia Southern University. They ain't gonna like this. That's why they tell me, Kurimeo, why don't you do a class in college or something? Because they don't want this. They ain't gonna allow this. That's why. Right? They're excavating this site. They ain't gonna like to know this. Not far behind them came a colony of Quakers who occupied 40,000-acre grant north of Augusta. They named Wrightsboro in honor of Governor James Wright. All right. Who's the Quakers again? We already got that chapter. Who's the Quakers? A lot of them were crypto Jews and crypto Muslims too. Now it says here, Wrightsboro's Quakers. And we're almost done with this chapter, I believe. It says many of the settlers at Wrightsboro evidently adopted Quakerism as a cover for Judaism. Again, they adopted what? Quakerism as a cover for Judaism. As a cover for Judaism. A lot of these Quakers became more Mormon, but they were Jews. And what does the Book of Mormon talk about? Indians being Jews? Oh. Perusal of the list of Appendix K, Table 5 reveals surnames, among others, like Cooper, Hart, Blevins, and Guest, which we have encountered elsewhere. Given names are also telling. Although we find, as may be expected, a preponderance of Hebrew names, many are not biblical. Adin, Asahel, Benijah, Manoah, Resin, and Simri, for instance. Others are Greek and hark back to the centuries preceding the Common Era and continuing through the Roman Empire, when most Jews were Greek in speech and cultural traditions, or right, Hellenized Jews, right? Archelaus, Axia, Cassandra, Chloe, Phoebe, from Pharabus, Phoebus, Lydia, Philippine, Phoenis, Phoebe, Rhoda, Sibylla, Theodati, Avarilla, Priscilla, Latia, and a few others are Latin or Roman. We can gain some insight into the business relationships and evident crypto-Jewish identities of these Quakers by looking at the will of Israel Robinson or Robertson or Robertson or Robinson, son of Reuben, made in Riceboro in 1773. After distributing numerous horses and cattle among family members, Robinson gives 100 acres lying on the head of Beaver Dam in South Carolina, more likely North Carolina, where it is thought there is an iron mine, to son and executor David Robinson Sr. The will was witnessed and the probate witnessed as well by Benjamin Cooper, Isaac Cooper, and Mary Brown. Isaac Cooper was born in the Norfolk area, was related to our William Cooper, the guide and scout for Daniel Boone, migrated through Granville and Butte counties, North Carolina, and received a land grant at Wrightsboro in 1774. The Robertson family produced James Robertson, a leader in Watauga and East Tennessee, and founder of Nashville and the Cumberland settlement in Middle Tennessee, Scottish in origin, and we would suggest Sephardic Jewish. The line cannot be traced farther back in Scotland than the 16th century because they were coming from Spain and Portugal. See what they're letting you know? The family lent their name to Robinson County, North Carolina. Robertsons intermarried with persons of surname Bean, Cox, Gower, Gore, Hebrew, Marks, for Marks, Nichols, Sevier, Xavier, Sephardic as in John Sevier, first governor of Tennessee, was a Sephardic Jew, John Sevier, okay? Shelton and Span for Spain, as well as other Robertsons. Many of these names are considered Melungeon. Both Robertsons and Coopers were involved in land speculation and mining, the latter often a Jewish activity, as we saw with Joachim Gans in chapter 1. David Cooper, 1725 to 1792, was a mineral surveyor. E pluribus unum. Because of its exposed location on the southern frontier, its ambiguous charter, and lack of control by authorities, the colony of Georgia had points of entry that were easily breached and borders that leaked like a sieve. Its situation allowed all manners of immigrants to cross its boundaries or be offloaded in Savannah, Darien, and the Sea Islands of Frederica. Some of its first settlers actually came from the West. The half-breeds who settled outside Augusta. Remember the half-breeds are talking about were these Jews, Sephardic Jews, and Gypsies that had been brought to the Mississippi. They had intermarried with the local tribes there, and they were being called half-breeds or mixed. And they had moved to Georgia from the West. They had actually gone to the East Coast when the new colonists were coming in. Many of these immigrant groups stayed only long enough to bring over others like themselves and consolidate their numbers before heading for greener pastures. Not a few of the recruits for the Melungeon experiment that arose in Daniel Boone's Kentucky and Tennessee after 1763 once lived or passed through Georgia. The character of the colony changed from decade to decade. Land policy was not fixed until after the Revolutionary War. Georgia never managed to settle the Creek Indian claims nor define its boundaries precisely until the early 19th century. It long remained the least populous colony of the original 13. With its thin population, it nearly fell to the British during the Revolution. Throughout all these developments, the ties that bound people together appear to have been Jewish and anti-Catholic and anti-Spanish, the royals, the Holy Roman Empire. Georgia thus became the only colony where it was possible, like Mordecai Sheftall, the Savannah merchant and patriot, to be a Jewish American and not just an American Jew. Okay? And that's chapter 9. All right? And this was the book, A Genealogical History, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America. We just read chapter 9. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Much love and respect. Thank you for tuning in. Wow.